Good Disruption, a lively discussion between UVA Darden School of Business professors Yael, Grushka-Cockayne, and Mike Lenox on cutting-edge technologies and practices that are challenging the status quo. Hey, Mike.
How you doing, Yael?
I'm good. How are you doing?
We're moving to the end of the year. This is going to be, the holiday season. Are you excited?
I'm super excited. I was just wondering if there's a good, good vibration song that has like a little bit of a jingle with it.
Well, there's
holiday
there's
vibe.
Like the Beach Boys Christmas song,
There you
right?
go.
There's lots of great Christmas songs. I have to say, not many great Hanukkah songs.
There are a few, but yeah, we're working on it.
As a naive American, all I know is dreidel, dreidel, dreidel. That's the one I got.
That's not the best. Yeah,
it's not the best. Okay, good. You're not going to sing.
There are others. I'm not going to
sing.
sing. No, I'm going to spare you. Of all my talents, singing is not one of them.
When does Hanukkah fall this year?
Actually, exactly on Christmas. So
really,
it's one of those years where it's super late.
Like, how rare is that?
It's
got to be pretty rare.
It's pretty rare. Yeah, and it will jump back to closer to Thanksgiving in a year. So yeah.
It moves all around. Yeah, December 25th. It's Christmas. That's that's what we got.
So this year it's going to be both.
Do you have any big family traditions?
Well, we definitely celebrate both, and we enjoy lighting the candles. We enjoy, handing out gifts the morning of. Our biggest family tradition, I would say, of our own, is that on the 1st of January, we like to take our piggy banks to one of those machines that you can dump all your coins.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and get like a toy with it or something, a book.
That's a cool tradition.
Yeah, we've
been
doing it ever since we met. So
my favorite part is actually the decorating, even more than I would say Christmas Day itself. Just getting the tree up, and I'm a big believer, as though it's probably not the least expensive thing to do, is to go cut a tree every year.
Yeah, that's a very old-fashioned.
Old-fashioned. Yeah. There's no fake tree for our main tree in the house.
We definitely like to sit around and watch television and enjoy some holiday movies. And the family always tries to persuade me to watch Elf every year and Christmas Vacation.
Of course, these are the classics, the classic Christmas movies.
Exactly.
Yeah, our big debate in the house is Macy, my wife, loves Hallmark movies, like the Hallmark Christmas movies, and I have a fairly low tolerance for these. These are, they're fine. They're fine. But yeah, I'd rather take an Elf over the Hallmark Christmas movies.
Well, as we wrap up 2024, which is hard to believe, and we see the end of the year, and reflect on the year that we've had on our podcast.
Yeah.
Lots of disruption, little disruption. Where does the year stack in terms of a disruptive year?
It's funny. I think there's a lot of actual evidence of this, that no matter where you are, whatever generation, whatever year we're talking about, every year, every generation feels, oh my goodness, things have been so disruptive. And so it's easy to say it's been a disruptive year. And but I always try to take that kind of grain of salt that, like, you go to whatever year it is, people are going to say, oh, wow, it's been a disruptive year.
Yeah,
so I don't know. It's going to take 50 years before we can look back and say, was 2024 really disruptive, or was it just kind of the norm? So.
Well, I'm seeing things that are becoming the norm, little things that some of which we've talked about in the program and some we haven't, like more and more houses have digital keys and folks using their phone and the door, the doorbell and so on. And how does AI inform your household, and things that were very popular when we used to talk about Internet of Things.
Yeah.
And suddenly now you're seeing them kind of becoming more commonplace.
Is this a future episode for us?
Yes, it is.
All right. Well, let's talk about the big one first here. Yeah. So let's talk about AI. We've done a number of podcasts that have touched upon this topic. It is advancing quickly.
It is.
Any updates from you or reflections on where we are now, December 2024, versus where we've been the last couple of years?
I do think that this year has been just unbelievably disruptive, or I would say a game changer in terms of AI. Where we were a year ago or so, everybody was fearful, everybody was nervous, there was a lot of concern about it and unknown. There was a lot of confusion around, for instance, in our domain, the use in higher ed and in the classroom. And I think that now it's becoming a lot much more ubiquitous, for sure. So anything that you do on your computer these days, if you open a browser, if you open your phone, if you draft an email, folks are used to seeing it everywhere. And so it's almost like it accompanies us in everything we do, definitely digitally. And that's okay. People don't fear it as much. They start to leverage it and use it, and they expect it. Nobody does any regular search anymore. Everybody uses the AI in the tool. And so I think that there are places where, and pockets that it's just become the norm very, very fast.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that I think there's two dimensions to this. There's kind of the general popular understanding of the technology and experience. And there, I think, we're at that point in the hype cycle where maybe a little bit of the euphoria has worn off and people are struggling to see how are they going to really use this in their daily lives. The other part, though, is just how the technology itself is advancing.
Yeah.
Have you heard of like Notebook LM?
Yes.
It is able to create a podcast with a very little prompt that sounds, dare I say, just like our podcast.
Like us, right?
And again, we've joked, maybe we are just an AI and no one knows, but that's not the case. For many listeners,
We're really here.
But man, you're seeing some of these opportunities and these new uses of the technology that are
instantaneous and super impressive.
Yeah.
And so I think I agree with you that the euphoria has worn out, but also how close everybody feels to it. I do think that more people have their head around what it is that the large language models are doing, what are the limitations. They understand the players and a little bit how it's going to shake out. Well, maybe not everybody's an active user. Very few people, at least in certain parts of the world, have never opened it or looked at it or discussed it.
Yeah.
And so the examples of use cases are becoming more and more commonplace. And so there is some stability, I would say, in terms of a disruption. There's some stability that we're seeing around us.
Yeah, I think that's right. My one prediction is I do think we'll see a shakeout amongst AI firms. I feel confident about that. And what's funny about that is when it happens, there will be this rhetoric about, oh, see, this was all overblown. And I find it humorous that there's people who are like, it's going to be just like the .com boom. And my response to that is always like, that internet thing, that was pretty good. It had legs. It had legs. It wasn't just a fad.
Exactly. And so we take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We throw many different opportunities, companies, innovations around AI. Some will stick, some will not. Some will turn out to be a dud and buckle under. But definitely there'll be a few that will thrive, and then they will take us to the next wave. So I do think that it's the nature of a disruption, and you would know better than I do. But the technology is improving all the time. The number of versions that OpenAI alone has released since last year is just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Companies, Google's changed the AI's tool name. Companies are jumping up left, right, and center. You now have dedicated tools for programming, for music, for imaging. I mean, I'm teaching a course this semester around coding with GPT that last year maybe a couple of prompts and students would get clarity on a function. And now within a button, literally a button, the entire website gets done. The HTML, the JavaScript, everything gets done automatically by the AI. And it's just a game changer for our students.
Do you think coding is going away?
Oh, it's totally going away in your native basic way that you and I were trained potentially to code, where you sit there and write every single function from scratch.
No more for loops. And
the for loops are still there. But AI writes it for you, and you have to understand how to leverage it. And so when we are now working with our students, it's a lot more on how do you understand what the AI is telling you, and how do you then continue to engage with your user to make sure you're developing the right products for that user. So it's a totally different conversation.
Yeah. And we've talked before about just what that means for jobs and which jobs are going to be most important.
Exactly.
Prompt engineer is a thing now, and they're getting paid very well for those who can do this well.
Yeah. And that will see its wave too, and that will come to an end too. But from your perspective, so that we talked about AI, which I'm very passionate about. What have you seen, or what do you think has changed the most this past year in terms of disruption?
I'm not going to answer that one, but one I want to go back to.
Of course.
I'm just going to ignore that. No, we'll get to that. But the one I wanted to get back to is crypto.
Okay.
So September 2022, we had our crypto podcast.
Yeah.
I boldly said, and I still will stand by this, that this is a fad. Bitcoin is a fad. Here are some facts for our listeners. When I made that bold prediction in September, Bitcoin went down to $18,000 a coin by December, one of its lowest points it had been.
Yeah.
Mike vindicated.
Yes.
It's now trading at $78,000. So as I always tell
Mike is embarrassed.
Right. So as I tell my students, there's a reason I'm a college professor. Don't invest on my advice there.
Fair enough.
I'm going to stick by my guns on this one, though. I still struggle to see the actual use case for cryptocurrency. As I said in our original podcast, I think blockchain has value and it will continue to develop as a technology with certain uses.
Right.
But the crypto itself, it's just hard for me to say. I do think.
So the exchange, the notion of the blockchain as a ledger, as
Exactly.
exchanging goods, as transferring goods,
or as a way of recording
as
information.
recording information,
Yeah.
that's going to stick. But the currency in terms of money
Exactly.
is not going to necessarily survive.
And I think, the thing that still gives me hope that my prediction is correct is we're still not seeing it really used for transactions.
Right.
So it is completely a speculative asset at this point. Now, with that said, especially Bitcoin, could it just be the new gold for a variety of reasons that people like to hold? Maybe because they have dystopian views of what's going to happen to the world and the economy. Maybe, right?
Okay.
Maybe. Personally, I still would not be.
So mostly for
investing.
trading, not necessarily to use as a currency.
Right.
Yeah.
Or just an asset,
Yeah,
just an
yeah,
asset that
yeah.
you can have that has certain features to it. And again, in the same way that people will hold gold. With that said, maybe I'm risk adverse. I still would not. I would not be putting my 401k in Bitcoin and in crypto at this point. But clearly, people have made fortunes on this. It just feels like a speculation bubble here of the first order. But I'm just waiting for it to pop.
It could be, and this is a general question that I'm not sure we've discussed in our podcast often enough. Some of our disruptions are of course affected by policy and by politics.
Yeah.
And this is an example of one that
Yeah.
some of the increase that you see right now, or some of the added value and the trading value has to do with the political climate around
Yeah.
us. You could probably say that for many of the disruptions,
Right.
including AI and what the regulators are or are not doing, and how that impacts the success and the evolution of the technology, and even how it becomes ubiquitous or popular, what it disrupts
Yeah.
and what it doesn't disrupt. But it's interesting to see it live, how it happens.
I think it's interesting with the question of regulation of crypto, which obviously there's a huge push not to regulate it in any way. But we regulate financial markets often to prevent bubbles, right? To prevent runs on banks and the like. So this desire to be like, don't regulate us, don't put these restrictions in. My reaction is, okay, but then it should actually be exactly what I'm worried about here, that
Right.
these are going to be these bubbles and these runs. And
a lot of people will lose a lot.
a lot of people will lose a lot of money here. And so it's not clear to me that regulation is limiting the industry. It might actually the lack of it will actually create exactly the worry that I have.
Let me ask you this question. Have we seen much innovation in the field? Meaning when we spoke,
Yeah.
a year or so ago, there were certain aspects that we were exposing and covering and discussing, stablecoin and the like,
Yeah.
and all kinds of innovation, technological and otherwise innovation that are trying to help regulate and help give faith and trust in the system. Have we seen much happen and evolve?
Well, I think this is where policy might come in, because I think there are some really good use cases for digital currency
Okay.
as distinct from like Bitcoin and crypto.
Yeah.
And I think there has been a push and a belief, like, should the U.S., put out a digital currency, a digital dollar, basically, that would be backed by the full faith of the United States government and the Treasury. That's really interesting. And maybe in the current political environment is not going to happen.
Interesting.
Because the interests of the Bitcoins and the crypto
Is to not
not have that competition.
Interesting.
And so I think that will be interesting to see if there'll be just a full pullback from that idea of a digital dollar currency.
Yeah. Interesting. Fascinating. Okay.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah. What
do you
else?
think
What
that we
about
should-
you? What else do you want to return?
Should we revisit over the past year? How about, well, I know that I'm hearing more and more people talk about autonomous vehicles. We just spoke about that recently.
We
right?
did. We did.
But that seems like it's picking up, at least in some parts of the country, in the U.S., pretty rapidly.
Yeah, we solved it. We've it's done.
The disruption has occurred.
The disruption has occurred. I don't know.
Did you drive around in one of these taxis in San Francisco?
I haven't yet. I've seen them. I've seen them on the road, but I haven't had a need to hail one of these. Have you done it yet?
No, not yet.
Yeah, I've talked to students who've done it and others, and it is impressive where the technology is. I'm getting myself constantly in trouble with probably Elon Musk, but like the cyber taxi that they just released or announced.
Yep.
What struck me as odd about that with Tesla is they were pitching it as if no one's thought about this or done this, and I'm like, Waymo's been on the road for years now.
Right.
Cruise has been on the road for years now,
Yes.
and they're still not even giving us a date for when these taxis are going to be on the road. Right. So we'll see. We'll see if the vision that Musk has for autonomy, wins out here. But to be clear, they're not the pioneers here. I mean, they're one amongst a handful of companies who have been pushing that. And again, others are on the road. I can hail a Waymo in Phoenix and San Francisco right now. Yeah. I can't do that with a Tesla.
Do you believe that the public's trust in those technologies is increasing?
Yeah, I think this is the way technologies always, especially these potentially disruptive ones and dangerous ones evolve, is that as more people see them on the streets and use them as a ride share, we're going to get more comfortable with the whole idea of a driverless car.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we're on that trajectory. I do think there's, as we talked about in our podcast, there are still these difficult technological challenges for full level 5 autonomy, especially things like weather. Snow. There's just certain circumstances that I don't think the technology's there yet.
Although I must admit, now that I have a driver in the house, or a third driver, my teenager is driving, any technology that could be developed to help me feel safer and to sleep at night, and something that is there in the car supporting him, even though he's a great driver, I think would go along. So. Yeah,
I think we both came down that this is not a no disruption. It's just might be a long time before we get there.
Okay, but related, if we're staying with the Teslas of the world, electric vehicles have also had a rocky year.
They have. Okay, so I'm passionate about this.
I know. You're on your Vivian now.
I am, and I try to check my enthusiasm with trying to be a rational interpreter of this. But I actually do feel strongly about this, and I have looked into some of the data here. What you're hearing is a lot of rhetoric about the limits of EV sales. What people are looking at, though, are often individual companies. So Ford is struggling, and they're pulling back on their EV plans. Tesla is seeing increased competition and arguably has suffered some from Musk's image on whether people desire to buy these cars. That is very different than whether a technology shift is occurring from fossil fuels to EVs or from internal combustion engines to EVs. The number everybody needs to look at is the percent of new cars sold that are EVs. Okay. And every data point that I've seen suggests that is still increasing.
At the same rate as it did?
Depends on the region. Okay. There are certain parts of the world now, Norway is up to like 95% of new cars are EVs. Wow. Sweden is like 83%. Yes. China is getting close to 50%. That's over 40% of new vehicle sales are EVs. So keep your focus not on the noise but on the signal here, and that
industry level, not company
level, not company level. And also recognize that auto sales is a very cyclical business with the business cycle, and so the total number of vehicle sale is going to be ebbing and flowing depending on where the economy is. So that's why I say that the most important stat is percent of new car sales that are EVs, and that again continues to grow. It's noisy, not necessarily, nice, smooth,
after a few
new
years
curve.
Of inflation, it could be that, as you point out, the entire industry is kind of slowed down a little bit.
Exactly. And again, as we know with disruption, incumbent firms often struggle with this. And so when the Fords and the GM are struggling, that actually might be exactly what we would expect with this transition. So I remain bullish, and I'm sticking to my EV transition.
Okay.
I think I put out there 2030. I think the vast majority of new car sales will be EVs. I'm worried that might not be true in the U.S., but it looks pretty good forecast for many other parts of the world.
And you've been at this for a while in terms of your passion for EVs. Have you seen the technology evolve significantly or change? Now you're
the big question is cost, right? That to me is the thing that will continue to, no pun intended, drive this further there. I do think we're hitting, the rate of improvement is maybe not what it was 5-6 years ago. That is somewhat to be expected, I think, given where we are in the diffusion cycle here. There are companies out of China like BYD that are producing, inexpensive EVs, and they are starting to dominate the market. And this is where geopolitics start to come in. We're not allowing them to be sold in the United States.
The day that we will one day, maybe if in the future.
Yeah, and it's a weird dynamic to think that we might have these inexpensive EVs that are interesting and maybe new dominant technology diffusing in some parts of the world, but not in other parts of the world. We tend to think of ourselves in the United States as a technology leader and always on the forefront of new technology. And I worry, are we like the blockbuster, right? Or if you go to a place like Cuba where they have cars for a variety of reasons you can imagine from like the 1950s that everyone's retrofitted and kept going here. It's like, is that our future? And while everyone else is driving, these new advanced EVs, I hope that's not the case. But it's interesting to see how this is playing out globally at this point. The U.S. is lagging Asia and Europe in EV adoption.
And definitely Scandinavia has some advantages there with a smaller footprint, already quite a lot of activity around sustainability and some general appetite to adopt it as a society in general.
Yeah, and there's always that resistance to new technology. We talk about that at almost every podcast. And I think you're seeing some of these countries are getting to a tipping point where fear of the technology, fear of range anxiety, they're getting over that. They're seeing all their friends are driving the vehicles. And dare I say, I think you're right in Norway and Sweden, there also probably is a social dynamic of like, why would you buy the old thing?
Exactly.
You buy the new thing. I think it's similar. Like eventually people stopped going to Blockbuster Video, right? They were embarrassed. Get Netflix, go streaming here. I think it's a similar dynamic is starting to play out in some markets.
Yeah, and it's again, I'll just point out that in some of those countries, we also definitely see the impact of, as you point out, policymakers, regulation, and how that helps either encourage or discourage certain adoption of technology.
Yeah.
Have you noticed in Abbott, if you go and eat lunch here, I don't know how often you eat lunch at Darden, but you may have noticed that we have a little internal farming going on.
We've got a little vertical farming. Here from one of our own student ventures that has done quite well over the last few years.
Yeah, it makes me laugh when I go by it and I see that it looks like a little greenhouse in the middle of our dining room.
Yeah.
So we spoke about that this year too. Any reflections on has that changed? Maybe it doesn't move as fast as that.
I don't know if it moves that fast, and I also think my general sense that this is important and interesting and not scalable in a way to, at least if you're concerned about our climate change challenge, that it's going to address that. But I think it's a positive, right? It's positive that Darden has one and you're starting to see more diffusion. I think it'll be interesting to see, does it ever become a thing in people's homes? Because some of these are small units that you could put in your home and have a little garden, maybe a little herb garden right there in your kitchen.
In your apartment.
Or in your apartment.
Yeah.
So it remains to be seen there.
Yeah. We also spoke about 3D fashion and digital fashion.
I was going to bring that up. That was our most popular podcast this year. I'll just point that at. I know this was in your wheelhouse. Any further reflections on digital fashion?
I think that the industry, the fashion and the apparel industry, is definitely ripe for disruption as well. I think it's not just the apparel itself; it's the supply chain that comes with it, which I think we've talked about both in that episode and we've talked about in other contexts that. It's the way the world works these days is that we don't want to travel around the world to, outsource one specific material, but you want things that are designed and made in the moment for the consumer in that specific location. And so to the degree that digital fashion allows us to do that, to the degree that 3D printing of a material, of a fabric, of a garment, to design to the specificities of the customer can be done and save us all that angst around transporting it all the way around the world. I think it's going to bring a big wave of disruption. Are we seeing that quite yet? I'm not quite sure. Well,
and this is where, and I forget if we talked about during the podcast, but where the geopolitics come into play. I mean, we're at a point where we might be seeing a decoupling, and even a more serious decoupling. And some of the proposals for tariffs that have been proposed by the Trump administration, I mean, these will have significant impacts if they come to bear on global trade.
Right.
I imagine for fashion, I think it's true that a lot of it does flow through, for example, China.
It does.
That's going to have huge impacts here.
Yeah.
And so maybe we're all going to need to be a little more local with our
and therefore
fashion.
these technologies will come back and be very valuable for all of the manufacturing needs that are more local.
Yeah.
You can start to imagine investing in that kind of technology in your own plant, in your own organization, so you don't have to go and bring stuff from abroad. So it'll be interesting to see.
So another one I wanted to bring up that we did a while ago now, virtual work. Right.
Yes.
So that one seems to continue. We're all still trying to figure this out. That was actually almost 2 years ago, I think, when we did that one.
And it's boomerang quite significantly in some ways, in the sense that we're hearing of the Amazons and others that are going back to 5 days a week, and everybody's in person and repopulating those office buildings. Yeah.
So where do we stand on that now? I mean, is this a disruption at all, or was this just a blip in time and we're all going back to work?
The generation of job seekers tells me that I think it's still disrupting the job market, in the sense that there is some selectivity when seeking a job, where now it's a criteria. So I don't think it used to be. If you think 10, 15, 20 years ago, it wasn't as big of a criteria that someone looking to get hired would take or reject a job based on the working conditions if you have to be in the office. It was almost obvious that you would have to be in the office. Very rarely were people working from home. These days, it's a much bigger consideration. And so you see definitely a generation of employees that are being a little bit more selective in finding those jobs that will give them some degree of flexibility. Maybe not 5 days a week total virtual, but that they want to pick and choose some combination. And so I think that it's disrupted. Maybe it's not over yet, but I think that it has offered some challenge to the traditional office type work.
When you think about the pushback by like an Amazon saying like everybody's got to be back in the office 5 days a week, is that a technological problem at the end of the day? In the sense that we're not delivering the full promise of virtual work at this point, so we're going to go retrench back. But is there a future where we still solve the virtual work downsides, I guess, that companies are reacting to?
I don't. I think the biggest downside will be harder to solve, in the sense that people were missing people. People were missing the productivity, the added productivity and the added creativity and connection that comes with working in person.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe some of it was about monitoring or productivity or all the other considerations that when people are remote, you can't necessarily know what they're doing. But I don't think that was the main driver. I think the main driver was to still feel like people can come together, and it's almost like the sum is bigger than the parts, or that there's something extra that you get from a group of individuals that come together on a regular basis that you just cannot replace when folks are working remote.
That's really interesting, because I think you hear a lot of the rhetoric about people are being lazy, they're not really working, they say they are, but in some ways that is something we think could be solved by technology, right? You could monitor people.
And companies already are. I mean, there are so many ways to do that, to make sure that you're getting the output that you're looking for.
Right.
In my personal opinion, the shift that we're seeing right now is not an output-driven shift. I think the shift is about connection. It's about the added benefits of all that comes with interacting in the office. And things that are harder to describe as just sheer output.
I'm still intrigued by the idea that those types of engagements are critical, but do they need to happen 5 days a week, right? Like, can you create moments of engagement, creativity, building connections, but then, the next 4 days we're out of the office?
Some companies have a Monday, Friday work from home, Tuesday, Thursday be in the office. My sense is that companies like Amazon, it's just much harder to administrate if you provide more flexibility. And so 5 days a week easier to say. Everybody across the board is going to come in. We don't have to ask questions. It's not up to negotiation. It's very clear cut.
Yeah, rather than saying you choose, it's got to be like everybody's in the office a certain day. It does make me think about like commercial real estate, which I know has been, really hit by this trend and this work. But if you're only in the office one day a week and you have your whole team on one day, what happens the other days? Maybe you have 5 companies and each one takes a different day. Like Amazon is Tuesday.
Isn't that where you work? I mean, maybe maybe we'll hear back from Mr. Neumann not long.
I don't know if we'll hear back from him, but we're still out there. So maybe they haven't figured out the business model completely.
Well,
yet.
as we're wrapping up, one area that I think we should revisit in 2025 at some point, assuming we're going, we should go back to precision medicine. And the effect there, because I think that the health care systems, or more specifically like medical advancements, have evolved and they are continuing to evolve rapidly. And there's a lot of technological innovation and disruption there that is going to change all of our lives.
I would point out 2 of the Nobel Prizes for chemistry and for medicine were basically tech solutions, right? Big data solutions to these issues. So I think that would be a great one to come back to. One that I've had on my list for a while, and I've been skeptical, but it really now seems to be coming more into the forefront, is small modular nuclear reactors. And some of this is being driven by the demand for data centers and AI. So it's getting a real serious look. Because my big complaint over the years has been people talk about nuclear, but like nothing's actually happening. It seems like things are happening now. So I think that's definitely one I want to get back to.
Great. So now we're lining up our topics.
Yes.
So I'll add one to our wish list, and then we'll wish happy holidays and goodbye. But I'm keen to talk about, and I think you've heard me say this, digital twins.
I love it.
People are talking about digital twinning everywhere. And I think it merits some discussion. Some of the technology is, like in other instances, not all that new, and things that are built off of things that you and I both studied when we were students. But the use case and the real-time utility of it is tremendous. And so I think that there's going to be some really interesting applications that we can discuss.
I love it. Definitely look forward to that. Well, looking forward to the new year. It's coming up way too quick here. I mean, it gets to that season where we're all running around frantically trying to, find the Christmas gifts and the Hanukkah gifts and the like.
As always, we just want to thank our producer, Gary, our lead researcher, Becky, and of course,
a happy Hanukkah to you.
And happy Christmas and happy holidays to everybody. And I look forward to chatting more in 2025. We have to get used to saying that.
Yeah. And the New Year's coming quick.
Good Disruption is a podcast from the University of Virginia Darden School of Business.